Getting an IT job is more and more difficult. You have to build hands-on experience to get started. But you can't build hands-on experience without having a job. And every single year, hundreds of thousands of people are finishing college with a computer science degree, making it even more competitive to get a job. So in today's video, I will share with you the 3-step process on how you can get a lot of practical experience quickly. And you don't have to go to college for that. What we are going to do is we're going to create a home server in public. It's called a home lab, and it's your place where you can play around with enterprise technologies and figure everything out. And the great thing is, when you're applying for a job, you don't just say you know stuff, you can prove it. Before you start building your home lab, you need the right vehicle for it. Think of it like an actual car. You don't need a Lamborghini or a Porsche. What you need is any car, preferably an old car, or in this case your old laptop. And it doesn't need to have high-end specs. What it needs to have is 2 CPU cores, maybe 4 GB of RAM and 50 GB of storage, and you're good to go. In my case, I'm using a mini PC I got off Amazon for $300. And you can get a smaller one than this one for $100, or you can use your old laptop. It's also perfectly fine. Now, usually you'd install software directly on your home lab, and we're not going to do that. We're going to use a public Git repository that we're going to use to manage our home lab. So instead of installing software directly on our home lab, every single time we're going to install one app on it. And that app is going to look out for our Git repository, and if it sees any changes, it's going to download them and install them or deploy them for us. If you want to install something, you have to publish your changes to your Git repository. This makes your work transparent, because anyone, yes, even a recruiter or your future manager, can look these changes up. It shows your dedication and consistency as well as your technical skills. Consider another example. Let's say you deploy an application and that application needs an API key, and you store that API key inside of your Git repository. But this would expose it to everyone. Therefore, you have to encrypt your password. Because you're using a public Git repository to manage your home lab, it forces you to think about security as well, just like any other real-world company. And you don't want to install any software on your home lab. You want to install software that is actually useful to you. So let's say, for example, you're using Google Cloud or Dropbox. Maybe you can use Nextcloud. Because if you're using Nextcloud, it also forces you to think about how to store data on your home lab. Kubernetes will deploy Nextcloud on your server. Now imagine all servers are working fine except the one Kubernetes installed Nextcloud on. That one dies and all data is gone. And now you have to think about how to create backups or how to store your data in many places at the same time. But the question is, how often, and where? In professional settings, you store the same data 3 times. To use the same thing with our home lab, you can use an app called Longhorn for it. Every single time when your software requests 1 GB of storage, for example, Longhorn is going to give it that storage, but it's also going to create 2 copies of that data and place it on different servers. Later in the video, I'm going to share with you how you can get started building your first home lab. We're going to install Kubernetes, we're going to install GitOps, and we're going to connect it to your Git repository. And if you want to go beyond Nextcloud, you can go into the video description and check out my own home lab for inspiration if you like. Think of building your home lab as building a home for your family. You wouldn't start without a solid plan. Instead, you would design and plan your dream home. When you create your home lab, you're going to create config files that tell Kubernetes how it should build everything. This is called declarative. The opposite is called imperative, where you tell Kubernetes every single step it should do. It's like telling Kubernetes where to place each brick, instead of showing it a picture of what you want to have and it's going to build it for you. And I get it, you think this is not professional. Shouldn't an expert know how to build something instead of thinking about the result and getting it done? But this is not how you do it in the modern world, because think about it. Kubernetes isn't working as you thought it would work. One server dies, for example. Do you want to wake up at 3 a.m. and tell Kubernetes what to do? No, you want to tell Kubernetes to figure it out on itself. That is the magic of the declarative approach, which is why we're going to use it in our home lab. Plus, you don't have to think about changing hardware. If you have a new PC and want to use your old PC for your home lab, that's easy. Install GitOps and it makes sure that your software deploys on your Kubernetes cluster every time correctly. One of the best things about having a home lab is you don't work in the shadows. There are already too many people in the world that say they know something without having actual proof. Using GitOps with a public repository is all the proof you need. All changes are automatically logged, tracked, and open for anyone to review. When you install GitOps on your Kubernetes cluster, it will deploy software for you on your Kubernetes cluster. You tell which repository it should look out for. If it sees a change, it's going to look at what it has currently installed on the Kubernetes cluster. If it's not the same as the stuff you configured, it's going to install, change or delete anything on your Kubernetes cluster to make sure both things are in sync. This happens because you tell it about the end result and not how to do something. Let's think about building our home again. Your wife asked you to extend your home. You create a new plan without destroying your old home. Once the plan is ready, you're going to apply it to your existing home. Since you're using declarative files, you can always roll back to an older version. And you can create new branches to test out new features, and once they're ready, you can merge them into the main branch again. This is great because you can have one Git repository for many clusters. If you want to try around and play with things, use a staging cluster. If you want to save your family vacation photos, create a production cluster. And applying these concepts is actually easier than you think. It only takes 5 minutes, and later in the video we're going to apply these concepts together. When working in public, it makes sense to use enterprise tools. You want to use the same tools as if it's your real job. But instead of having to manage millions of servers, you're only going to manage a few or only a single one. This gives you the same skills that experts have to manage millions of servers worldwide. Think about this. OpenAI once said they're using Kubernetes to deploy and operate ChatGPT. That alone shows how valuable Kubernetes skills are. And because Kubernetes and GitOps are so closely related, you can use your home lab to build real Kubernetes experience. By using these technologies, you have to think about problems you might not anticipate at first. Think about deploying Nextcloud on your Kubernetes cluster. You want to store your family vacation photos on it. But then the hard drive crashes. All data is completely gone. How does Google make sure that whenever you send anything to Google Drive, all the data is always available? You have to think about how to deploy the software. Kubernetes can deploy 10 instances of Nextcloud, but it's not going to tell you where it's going to deploy them. It is up to Kubernetes where it's going to deploy them. So in theory, it could happen that Kubernetes puts 10 instances on one server. Now, if that server dies, all your data is still gone. On the other hand, what you can do is you can tell Kubernetes to have one Nextcloud instance on every single server. But the big problem is, these instances are not going to sync the data over. So if you store something on one instance, it's not going to get synced to others. So if that one crashes or that hard drive dies, all data is still gone. So you have to think about how the industry is solving these problems in a real-world environment. That's what makes it so interesting. With that, you build hands-on experience about technologies the industry is actually using. And because you're using GitOps in a public repository, all of your changes are always logged and tracked. So you don't go in and tell people you have experience, you can actually prove it. Now let's start with the fun part in building our home lab. Before we're getting started building our home lab, however, we have to make sure we're building the right foundation. We're going to use Docker, we're going to use Kubernetes, and we will need a GitOps app. Docker is necessary because Kubernetes is using it to manage containers for us, and Kubernetes is necessary to manage servers for us, meaning cluster nodes. To get started with installing Docker, what we're first going to do is we're going to open Firefox. And I'm going to Docker Engine, and in my case I'm using Debian. So I'm going to the Debian docs, and what you can do is you can go on uninstall Docker, and you're scrolling up a little bit. You will see install pre-releases, and then you'll come up to installing using the convenience script, which is not the way you should use it in production. There's another one that you can use, but I'm going to use this one for now. So I'm going to copy this one over, and I'm going to paste it in, bam. And we're going over and saying sudo sh get docker. Let's do this one. And now it's going to install Docker for us, and once it's installed, we're going to progress over to Kubernetes, because what we also need is we need Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is coming in different flavors. And a commonly used one is K3s for a home lab, because K3s is built to be lightweight and very easy to install. So we're going to install it once Docker is ready. Perfect, and now Docker is installed. So what we can do is, for example, say sudo docker ps, and Docker is running. Perfect. Now let's get started with installing K3s. So we're going to search for K3s. And we're clicking on the first link here, k3s.io, and we're going to the docs, and we're going to the quick starting guide, and the only thing we have to do is we have to copy this script, and going back here, pasting it in here, and pressing enter. And now it's going to download Kubernetes in a smaller version, meaning the K3s version of it, the K3s flavor of it. And once it's installed, we can progress on with using the GitOps app. Perfect, so now it's installed. Every single time when you're using K3s, it is also going to create a config file. And we're going to use this config file to interact with our Kubernetes cluster. And you can find that file in etc. rancher K3s. And here you can see the k3s.yaml file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say sudo cp etc. rancher k3s, and I'm going to copy it into my personal folder, right? But now I don't have the rights for it, so I'm going to say chown. Now I'm going to take my username and again my username, because it's creating a group with the same name. So I'm saying give the user and the group bjsonnen access to K3s, and maybe I should run this as sudo to make sure that it's getting applied. And now I can say ls-al, and what you can see is K3s is owned by bjson, which is perfect, which is what we want. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say export kubeconfig equals, and now I'm going to give it the full path, which is home bjson k3s.yaml. And now I can say kubectl get ports -a. And what you can see here is a couple of pods are already running on our Kubernetes cluster, which is perfect. So now we have built the absolute minimum foundation for our GitOps home lab, which is we installed Docker and we installed Kubernetes. Now the next thing what we have to do is we have to install an app for GitOps. And you have two options. You have FluxCD or Argo CD. And I'm using FluxCD because FluxCD is forcing you to use the CLI, and Argo CD is coming with a beautiful web interface. And you can use Argo CD. There's nothing bad about Argo CD. Actually, I think Argo CD has the bigger community than FluxCD. I just prefer using FluxCD, and for this example, we're going to use FluxCD. So what we're going to do is we're going to say FluxCD, and we're clicking on the first link, which is fluxcd.io. And then we're going onto documentation and getting started. Now, if we're scrolling down here a little bit, is we have to install the FluxCD tab. And what we can do is, now because I'm on Linux, right, and maybe on Mac you can use the same. So I'm going over to Homebrew. I quickly have to install Homebrew on this VM. So I'm copying this one, going back to my little terminal over here and pressing enter. And now it's going to install Homebrew for me. So in case you don't have that, you need it. But you can also go over to the CLI install documentation over here. Now Homebrew is installed, and what we're going to do is we are again back on getting started. I'm going to copy this one and I'm going to install the FluxCD CLI. And now it's going to install it. So the next thing what we have to do is we have to give FluxCD our credentials for our GitHub token. Now, a GitHub token allows FluxCD to access your Git repositories, to upload files and download files. And it's also going to need it to upload files to it because it's creating some system files on your Git repository. So let's get started with this one. So what we're going to do is we're going over to github.com. And by the way, you can use other Git repositories or Git services as well. So for example, if you want to use GitLab, that's also fine. What I'm going to do is on the top right corner, I'm going to click on my profile picture. And I'm going to settings. And then I'm scrolling down here. And I'm going over to developer settings, personal access token, and I'm creating a classic token. Now when I'm clicking on generate new token, I have to select generate new token classic. And what we now have to do is we have to give it a name. And in this case, I'm going to say, I call my YouTube. And then I'm giving it all the repo permissions. I'm scrolling down and I'm clicking on generate token. Now it's very important that you save this token, right? In my case, I'm just going to copy it. I'm going back to my terminal and going to say export github_token equals, and I'm going to paste it in here. I'm pressing enter. And by the way, regarding this GitHub token, you shouldn't leak yours. And I'm going to delete my GitHub token in a second once I'm done, right? But now the next thing is when I'm going back to FluxCD, it's also going to ask me for my username. All right, so quick thing, I apparently forgot to export my GitHub user. I'm going to say it's bjson, right? Let me quickly check if it's the right one. Yeah, it's the right one. Perfect. So what we're now going to say is we're going to scroll down a little bit and we see this command. And by the way, you're using this command both to install FluxCD with a completely new repository or to use an existing one. So you're going to copy this one and going back to your terminal and you're pasting it in here. Now here's the thing, what you're going to do is, you see this path here, and this path is going to be visible for anyone in your who looks at your Git repository. And it's only the name for your cluster. In my case, I'm going to use a staging cluster, so I'm going to call this staging. But you can call it any name you want, right? And then the repository. Now in my case, I'm going to say this is the repository should be home server. Remember, we never created this repository because Fluxity will create it for us. Now in my case, I already have a Git repository called HomeLab. And if you want, you can check it out and get some inspiration from it if you like. But that is the reason why I'm calling mine home server, and I'm pressing enter. And now it's going to connect to GitHub. It's going to create that new repository, and then it's going to download all the files and install them for us. So we quickly have to wait until this is done. Perfect, and now Fluxity is installed. So what we can say is we can say kubectl get ports -a, and you can see there were a couple of ports added. So you can see Flux system and Kube system, and Flux system is the new one, right? So at this point, it created a new GitHub repository. So what we can say is we can say github.com/bjsonnen/home server. I'm pressing enter. And you can see clusters, staging, Flux system. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to download this one. I'm going to set git clone. I'm pasting it in here. Perfect. And now I'm going to, where is it? Oh, there. So now I'm going to go into my home server, right? I'm going to press ls, and I'm going into the clusters one, and I'm going into the staging one. Important, we're not going into the Flux system, we're going into the staging one. Now, the problem right now is that Fluxity doesn't know where to look for your config files, so we have to tell it where to look for, meaning the Kubernetes manifest files. So what we're going to do is we're going back to the getting started one, and we're scrolling down a little bit. And what you can see here is, once we scroll down, it's this one what we need, deploy podinfo application. So in my case, I'm going to use a command that is a little bit different, and you can use the same one, for example, right? So we have Flux create customization, and I call my stuff apps, and source is the Flux system, which is a namespace, and it should look for them in apps/staging. Now, this is not the root directory or anything, or not the staging cluster apps staging. It is going to start from the root of your Git repository. And then we have an interval every 1 minute, retry interval 1 minute, health check timeout 5 minutes, prune true, timeout 5 minutes, and we're going to put it into the apps.yaml file, and we're hitting enter, and ls apps.yaml, and we can print it out, and here it is. And this one is going to work fine, because now it's going to look for applications in our apps/staging folder. So let's go back and create a new folder, which is apps, and then we're going to into it, and we're going to say staging. We're going into the staging one, and now we want to deploy something. And in the past we talked about Nextcloud, so let's deploy Nextcloud, right? What I'm going to do is I can say mkdir, and I'm going to call this Nextcloud. I'm going to cd into it, and now at this point we have to go into my personal home lab. So I'm going to home lab, and you can see it right here, apps. And then we have, for example, staging. And I'm going to pick any of these. For example, in my case, I'm going to use Ollama. And I'm clicking on this customization.yaml file. And what this customization file is basically telling, hey, Fluxity, I want to apply these files. So I'm now just going to copy this one over. And I'm going to say nano. And we're going to call it customization.yaml. I'm hitting enter. And now I'm going to say right-click, paste. I'm going to paste it in here, and we will delete this patch strategic merge, which is a little bit more complicated. We're going to remove that one, and we're going to remove that one and this one. And now what we can say, for example, is we say deployment.yaml, meaning every single time when it is looking at this application, it will look at the deployment.yaml file, and it's going to apply that. I'm also going to change for the namespace from Ollama to Nextcloud, because we have to deploy that as well. And we're going to tell it, hey, by the way, I also want you to apply my namespace.yaml file. I'm going to save this one. And if I'm saying ls, we only have the customization.yaml file. Now this is great, but we don't have a deployment file, and we don't have a namespace file. So we're going to say kubectl create namespace. And we're going to call this one Nextcloud --dry run equals client -o YAML, right? And if we print it out, it looks like this, and we're going to put it into namespace YAML. And we can print it out again, and everything is working. Perfect. Now we can work on deploying Nextcloud, which is perfectly what we're going to do. So we're going to say kubectl create deployment Nextcloud, which is the name of the deployment, --image Nextcloud --replicas 1 --dry run client -o YAML. Right, I'm going to print it out. So now I'm going to put that into my deployment.yaml file. ls, and we have the deployment YAML file, we have the customization.yaml, and we have the namespace.yaml file. Right, so this one works perfectly fine. Now we're going back here into this folder. Alrighty, now back at our main repository folder, right, we have apps and clusters. And what we're going to say is git commit. We're going to say git add apps and clusters. Git commit feed deploy Nextcloud. Git push. And now if we're going back to the home server, you can see everything is updated. And now it's going to take a little bit of time until Flux is realizing there's a change. Now we can check if there are any changes by saying flux get customizations. And the current thing that is applied is DFB, which is this one. All right, so it's currently applying them. And we can say kubectl get ports -a. And now we should see a Nextcloud container creating. Perfect. So now we send the files over to our Git repository, and Fluxity pulled all this information down, and it's going to install them. For example, sometimes you're having the problem where Fluxity isn't updating everything correctly. What you can do is you can say flux reconcile customization, and then we're going to say apps. And now it's going to check if there are any updates, and sometimes it's going to take a little bit longer, maybe 1 to 2 minutes, so you can wait a little bit there. But flux get customizations, and it has applied the revision. Perfect. Now let's say kubectl get ports -a, and Nextcloud is running. Perfect. Now what we can do is we can say kubectl port forward -- namespace Nextcloud. Ah, perfect. Autocomplete is not working. So I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to paste it in here. And now I'm saying on port 8080 towards port 80. And let's open up localhost on port 8080. Enter. And Nextcloud is working. Perfect. And everything is running on Kubernetes. And now imagine it is running on your laptop, for example, and you can deploy whatever you want. Right? So in my case, I'm going to say, hey, by the way, this is my admin user and this is the password I'm going to use. So I'm going to say like install, and now it's going to install it. It will take a few minutes. No, it was going to take a few seconds. And this one is obviously slower because we're running everything directly through kubectl. So I can skip. I can go to files. I can open up maybe this logo, and everything is working. Perfect. Building a home lab is a fun and great way to build real-world experience with Kubernetes. In my company, I also have a lot of seniors and tech leads that are also using a home lab with GitOps together. Maybe not with a public repository, but that's something that you can decide for yourself. And the great thing is when you're applying for something and they are going to interview you, you both share the same hobby. So I hope this video has been useful to you, and I wish you all the best with your new hobby.